this is not a diet. You're not on a diet. So you don't have to behave like you're on a diet. Like our daily number one thing that we pursue every day is your food sobriety. And as a result of that, all these other things that you've been wanting are likely to happen. Like if you want to lose weight, if you focus on being food sober, you're probably going to lose weight.
Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Judy Cho, and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing, and it often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, the pleasure of sitting down with my friend and coach, Coach Mary Roberts. She has been in the carnivore keto space for nearly 10 years, and she has healed her own eating disorder or is in recovery, and also has lost, I think, over 120 pounds eating a nutrient-rich diet. Coach Mary Roberts is an executive coach and a food freedom coach and has worked with nearly 1,000 clients in over 7 years that she's been coaching. Mary is a certified eating disorder peer counselor, a certified nutrition coach, and a certified personal trainer, and a certified primal health coach and strength and conditioning coach for women. Mary has over 9 years of food sobriety and recovery from bulimia, binge eating disorder, and compulsive overeating. She has lost over 100 pounds and in her 50s is medication free. Mary's passion is to help others break free from food obsession and emotional eating and help people to finally live their lives. In this conversation, we talk a lot about food inclusivity and what it means to be healthy at any size and if there are any ramifications for that. We talk about the nuance of that. And then we talk about moderation and abstinence from certain foods and what really food addiction is and how to really start getting supported. If you have a hard time staying keto and carnivore, not because you can't tolerate fats or meats, which then make you run to the bathroom, but really because you just crave something other than what's permitted, quote unquote, on a carnivore keto diet. And you seem to always end up in the pantry for other foods that you know may not be beneficial for you, you may want to look into food addiction. I know the word addiction has such a negative connotation, but just if our relationship is not ideal with food, it's something to look into. And the thing is that I would not be surprised if most Americans suffer from this because when we are babies, the first thing that we have is when a baby is crying, we think maybe baby's hungry. And we always try to soothe and coddle with whether it's a bottle or when the child goes to the dentist and then we give them candy afterward. It's something that is so ingrained in our culture, and it's not always the best thing, especially when we become adults. I hope that this conversation helps you. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Mary. It's so good to have you back on. I always love talking to you and having dinner with you in person, and we have to do that soon. But if
Yes,
you can,
thanks for having me.
yeah, if you can introduce yourself for the people that may not have watched your previous episodes or don't follow you.
Okay, well, the nutshell version is that I've struggled with disordered eating all of my life, from a preteen to age 42, when I was finally able to apply the tools of recovery when I got my nutrition right. So I'm 52 now, and I've been on this journey for nearly 10 years. And I still learn something, new about myself every day as I'm pursuing, a better version of myself. So that's the very short story. I've struggled with eating disorders my entire life.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about treating eating disorders and just getting better and truly having that food freedom because I know you're one of the experts in our community. But before we talk about that, I know you've done some posts over the years about the all-inclusive communities now in terms of food freedom, healthy at any size. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and like all foods fit. Yeah, so I think that let's start with the all foods fit. I think that is a pretty like ridiculous notion, considering I think the last statistic I heard was that like 93% of the population is metabolically unhealthy. So I think based just on that alone, it's pretty clear that all foods don't fit, right? I think the other problem with that statement is that there seems to be a very loose definition of food. So I consider food real food. If it comes from the animal or the earth, it's food. And everything else that's like comes in a package, and most of the stuff that's sold in the grocery store, it's edible, but it's not nourishing, and I don't consider that food. So I think with that all foods fit statement, are we talking about real food? Then maybe they all fit. But even then, there are some real foods that some people just psychologically and behaviorally can't handle. So
Right.
the health at any size, really, I think it's a very misguided movement. I understand, I get that they're trying to promote, body positivity and loving yourself, which I think is great. I think that that's good advice to love ourselves. But I think if we love ourselves, then we're going to do our best to take care of our one and only body, right? So I don't like some of the criticism that I see in the keto carnivore space about this, because there's, you and I both, we follow a lot of different people in the space, and there's a certain segment in the space that doesn't seem to allow for like any middle ground, right? It's like if you're thin and have abs, then you're healthy, but anything other than that makes you unhealthy. And it doesn't, and I'm what I would describe as a mid-sized person. I don't have abs, but I'm not morbidly obese.
Right.
So, where do I fit in that? So I'm in the camp that it's normal for women to carry a little more body fat. And I think there's, a difference between having body fat and being obese to the point that it affects your health. So I have mixed feelings about that movement.
Yeah, a few thoughts. So going back to the food, all foods fit. I can see where people are like, well, it's just really about moderation. You shouldn't exclude yourself from having cookies or certain things. But when I interviewed Michelle Hearn, she talked about how a lot of these food companies really just want dietitians to say, yeah, Coke isn't that good for you, but it's just have it in moderation. And they just want dietitians to recommend just have it's permissible, but in moderation. And they just want that slight okaying about it so that then they know that sugar is very addictive and that these processed foods and packaged foods and ultra processed are super addictive. So even though you want to moderate it, you don't end up moderating it. So that's where I think it's just not ethical in a sense to say all foods fit, because a lot of these food conglomerates, they spend so much time in the labs creating highly addictive foods on purpose. And so that's my thoughts on that. So I agree with you fully that not all foods fit, and it will also be defined by what we define as food. And then I think most ultra processed foods would not even be considered food.
Right. Well, and it completely disregards the fact that food addiction and eating disorders exist.
Right. No, totally. And then the second thing about the healthy at any size. So I see that too. So at me being just kind of in the middle of not even like, I don't like to show my body and stuff. Like that's just not how I like to share and educate people. It's just not my style. Maybe I'm more conservative. I don't know. But with all that said, I do see what you're saying. So there is definitely this bro thing where I'm going to show my full body, and therefore you see my abs, you see how thin I am, and therefore that equals healthy. And I even bought into it for a little bit. So when I was super eating disordered, I thought if I become keto or I become carnivore, I have one meal a day and I fully binge, it's totally permitted. I don't have to work on my eating disorder, and I will be as thin as some of these people that advocate for it. And I realized very quickly that no, you can even gain weight on a keto carnivore diet. And as we had a practice, we know there are certain people that are super diligent, but they're chronically ill. And whether it's hormones, whether it's other reasons, they will never be the size 0 or size 5 or size whatever we define as thin and healthy. I also know many, many people in our practice that are really thin. And from the outside, they look like the token of health, and they're not. They're very unwell. And so we have 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds with chronic illness too. So it's a indicator of thinness can be health, but it's not always. And so I totally agree. I don't like seeing here are 5 carnivore women that look so healthy and they're naked. And I don't want to represent that. I could, but I just don't think that's the right message, to be honest. But so I totally get that. But I also think this healthy at any size, and if you're unwell and you're very obese and your markers may not look good and you have symptoms, and then just to say, well, this is my truth, you got to accept it. I also don't think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not in agreement either. I think at some point you have to like acknowledge this is, this is going too far, because I think, clearly morbid obesity has effects on our health. And the people that are morbidly obese saying, "Oh, I'm perfectly healthy," the reality is they're undiagnosed.
Mm. Yeah, and share a little bit about, so like I want to run through some statistics of why I don't think this whole healthy at any size and just be full all inclusive with just, if they want to be that weight, if they're happy, then let's love on them. I don't think it's true because statistics say otherwise. I'll talk about that, but you're like the perfect example. So you were heavier at a certain point and then you lost all this weight, and it's a pretty significant amount, and now you maintain your weight. You're not the thinnest person, but I still think of you as a token of health. So maybe if you could share a little bit about that
Yeah.
weight part of the journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started out at 260 pounds and I lost over 100 pounds. And I got to, as far as like clothing sizes, I was wearing a size 2 at one point.
Mm.
And because of my, where I was at my I was on the road to recovery with my eating disorder, but I couldn't see as a size 2 that I was as small as I was. I still thought I needed to lose weight. And so of course I was engaging in all the things. I did like OMAD for a while. I did a lot of fasting. I think that's really what I did the most. I did tons of fasting, and then I messed myself up and didn't change like the foods I was eating. Maybe I did start eating a little bit more reasonably to match, my activity, and I put on weight. And it was very distressing because I knew I wasn't being disordered with my food. I knew I was eating food sober foods. And so, because it's one thing like to put on weight and know, oh, well, this is because I'm not eating right. And it's another thing to like put on weight and just be like, why? And so it, got pretty frustrating. So yeah, I found this like middle ground now where I'm not morbidly obese, but I'm not a size 2 anymore. On average, a size 10, and I'm happy there. I feel strong. I'm definitely not, I wouldn't describe myself as skinny, but I don't think that I'm fat either. And I think that it's important that, we find a place that, where we can accept where we are. And I still pursue, I pursue the activities, to maintain health and to get stronger, to put on muscle mass. I still eat, nutrient dense food. I do all those things to maintain that. And I feel like, this is kind of where my body has settled, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I could talk more about your journey because I know you personally. I mean, you work out like a beast. I mean, you lift, you do so many things that I can't even do. And and you've been eating keto carnivore for such almost a decade now, is that right?
Yeah,
So
it'll be 10 years in March.
okay, that's insane. And I know you're somebody that doesn't cheat. And I know that, for all the dinners that we've been to, and I know that you work out all the time. So it's just, I just had a client not too long ago. We did her labs. She was hypothyroid Hashimoto's her whole life. She's in her 40s and she's technically defined as overweight, but all her markers have improved. Her glucose is better than mine. It's in the 80s. Her A1C looks good. And most people would say she's probably going to be unhealthy because of all her weight. And
Mhm.
she has lost weight over the years, and she's been carnivore for a very long time. And it just shows that it's just one indicator. It's not always an indicator to say you're overweight, you need to go on a diet, because it's just not true.
Yeah.
I just wanted to run through some statistics to show. So if this whole belief system of let them be, let them have their own truth, if they're healthy at that size, let them be. So since COVID, there's been a dramatic adverse effect with so many different things. So one, with eating disorders. So the National Eating Disorder Association has reported that their call volume has increased by 70 to 80% since different points of the pandemic. And they say that there's even a increase in ambulance attendees for suicidal thoughts and self-harm. An estimated 15 to 20% of teens self-harm, and it's just become higher and higher. It's increased. There was one study, this seems a little bit high, but increased by 99% since the pandemic. And I'll link to all those studies and the citations in our show notes. But it just shows that if truly this whole all-inclusive, just let things be, is great, we wouldn't have a teenage population that's overly medicated, overly struggling with self-harm, and also struggling with these severe eating disorders.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me because I think, there seems to be like across the board, when you say anything goes, that means there's no boundaries. And I think people need boundaries to be mentally and physically healthy.
So let's talk about like what is a food addiction, right? So I know whenever I say I struggle with an eating disorder, people will tell me, well, I don't have an eating disorder. I've never been diagnosed. I mean, yeah, I eat a little bit more than sometimes I want to. So what are signs of food addiction or an imbalanced relationship with food?
So I think some of the most common signs are you lie about what you eat or don't eat. You're a chronic dieter. I think, if all your life you're like on and off diets, you're always, looking for the next best thing. You're always trying to find the magic pill, lose weight, you don't like your body. Or you think about food constantly. That's another one. Like if my day used to be, I'd wake up thinking about food and like my whole day centered around pursuing food. And then I think if you like the nature of addiction is, that you feel better without certain foods, but you return to those foods anyway. That's, addiction behavior for sure. There's so many other things, but I would say those are the most common. But, if you start eating and you can't stop, whether it's a binge or like, compulsively eating all day, or every morning you wake up and you say, okay, today's the day, I'm going to stick to my plan today, and then you can't follow through on that, then that's a pretty big red flag.
There's a lot of people outside of the keto carnivore space that say this. So the number one feedback from non-carnivores I get is, oh, so she traded one eating disorder for a different eating disorder. So they think it's that now that I eat mostly meat, I have an eating disorder, which I know it's not
Yeah.
true because of all the mental freedom that you talked about. I don't have any of those things where I used to obsess over where are we going to eat? What can I eat? What can I handle? And lots of other
Yeah.
stressful things that would go on in my head. And now I have none of that.
Yeah.
But what do you say where people say, oh, because you're restricting carbs or because you're only eating certain meats, that's an eating disorder?
There's nothing disordered about stopping behavior that harms you, right? Like I get mad when I hear that because, oh, okay, so if I were to continue to eat food that I know doesn't serve me well, that I know harms my health, that's not disordered. But if I cut those things out, it is disordered. Like it's backwards. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense. There's nothing wrong with quitting the things that hurt us.
Yeah, that's like when you hear often when you started the carnivore diet, especially when you were eating McDonald's and eating all this junk food, had all this junk food in your cabinet, no one would
Nobody
say
does
anything
it.
to you. But as soon as you start eating carnivore and lose weight and actually look a little healthier, people think,
Yeah.
what about your heart health? So I totally get that.
Yeah.
What
I
what
got
about
asked that a lot.
oh, okay. What about the notion about abstainers versus moderators?
So I know this is a hot topic. And there are people out there who I mean, first of all, from an ed perspective, those of us with a disordered history with food, I mean, we would love nothing more, right? To be a moderator. Like that's like the goal. Except the problem is, with addiction, you don't become not an addict. There are people who I see it in the space. They become what I like in the drug world. Someone who uses occasionally is described as a casual user, right? So there are people, that used to like binge all the time or compulsively ate that now they occasionally use their drug foods.
Okay.
But I think that I don't think that makes them a moderator. I think there's like true moderators don't even have the same thought processes about food that addicts do. Like my husband is a moderator, and I guarantee you he never thinks beforehand, okay, I'm just gonna have one of this, or I'm just gonna eat a little bit, or when I go to this event, this is what I'm gonna do. He never thinks ahead. But as food addicts who are attempting to moderate, that's the thought process we have. And, I think that, addicts trying to be moderators, they have that thought process, where they debate about it or, before eating. But really what they're doing is they're using sheer willpower and discipline to stick to that. It doesn't mean they're now a moderator. It means they're now they're using their drug food casually. So like think about like if you're really in my mind, my food freedom is that I no longer even desire to have those things. Like I don't ever think, oh, well, I just want to have like a cupcake somewhere. Like that thought doesn't occur to me because in my brain, a cupcake is poison. Like, so I don't want to eat foods that harm me. And so I don't have this desire to moderate harmful things. And I've heard it said that like moderators get anxious at the thought of giving up food for good, but I totally disagree with that. I think that it's actually the opposite, that it's people who should abstain that get anxious at the thought of, never eating something again. Cause like, I guarantee if my husband woke up today and there was an announcement that bread didn't exist anymore, that like nobody could eat bread anymore, he'd be like, oh, well, that sucks. And then he'd go on with his day. But what do we as addicts and people obsessed with food and all that, when we come from that and we're not in recovery, the thought of like never having something again makes us extremely anxious. So I think moderators don't think about they don't think about food the same way. They don't process thoughts about eating the same way at all.
So you think when your husband, for example, goes into the pantry and ends up just having a piece of chocolate, it wasn't a decision of I just want a piece of chocolate. It's just I just wanted some chocolate and
yeah, I think he sees it. He's like, oh, that sounds good. He takes one bite and walks away. Whereas I never ate one square off of a chocolate bar in my life. He can do that. He only thinks about food when he's hungry. He doesn't, like, more times than not, he doesn't finish a whole dessert. We'll be at a restaurant, he'll pay $10 for a dessert and leave half of it on the plate. That's not something that I, as someone with an eating disorder, can relate to.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. A lot of times we'll say all carbs or no carbs, right? So that's the abstainer moderator personality. But for you, for example, you can add back certain carbs and still be defined as an abstainer. But some people would think, oh, well, now you're a moderator because you could add some carbs back. How do you delineate? How did you delineate that without the risk of binging on whatever new carb you added back?
So I think that it's important not to like have these like extremist definitions. I think we all have drug foods, and like I may have a drug food that for you, you can eat it just fine, and vice versa. So I think it comes down to like the individual. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be intellectually honest and true to our recovery and say, okay, well, Judy can eat Greek yogurt. Like, for instance, I can't do that because I want to eat all of it. One serving would just make me angry. Right. Like, so.
No, because I don't like Greek yogurt. So I'm like,
okay. Okay, bad example.
No, it's a perfect example because I don't like it. So I wouldn't really, I'd probably have one spoon and be like, I'm done.
Yeah. Right? So I think I think we all have to identify what our drug foods are. Because there are something, and that doesn't make, so we're not like either 100% abstainer or 100% moderate. Obviously we can moderate meat. Like, I think it really depends on the food, and we have to look at it. Like the hyper palatable, super sweet, creamy, decadent type, those foods, those are all my drug foods. I can get a steak and not eat all of it. I can have a little bit of sweet potato. It doesn't trigger anything. And then I can go months, without even thinking about eating it again. Like, so I think it's important for every individual to identify their drug foods and not like assign. Fruit's a good example. Some people are able to moderate fruit and other people can't. And so, it's just really knowing yourself.
No, I think that totally makes sense. What do you recommend to your coachees about everyone will eventually fall off the bandwagon sometime or another, whether it's the holidays, whether it was a birthday? What do you do because I see extreme behaviors where someone will say, okay, well, this weekend I went wild. And so starting Monday, I'm going to fast and have only one meal. And then that struggle then makes it worse because they're trying to do everything perfect starting Monday. What are your recommendations for when someone is going
Yeah.
through that?
So I think it's important that, if we make a eating decision that doesn't serve us well, if we, go off, I think it's important that we just make the next bite of food be one that serves us well and that nourishes us. Like, I think so many people make what we would call, food mistakes, and then they continue their disordered behavior to try to undo that somehow, right? Like you just said. So like so just going and doing a certain amount of exercise, or taking laxatives, or going on this long fast, like none of that's appropriate. So just, I tell my clients that if they, confess, or whatever word you want to use, if they do something that they feel like they shouldn't have done, I tell them, okay, we can't dwell on it. You can't beat yourself up for it. Just make sure that the next bite that goes in your mouth is on your food sobriety list, like that it's a food sober food. And then I, of course, encourage them to like reflect and, okay, well, what happened? Because I think when it comes to like relapse, like one thing I dislike about the ed treatment community is they treat relapse as if it's inevitable, right? Like you had said,
Right.
they'll say, oh, it's going to happen. Everybody's going to fail
So
at
true.
some point. They don't say that to people in AA and in the drug, like the 12-step drug and alcohol recovery programs. They tell them, if you drink or if you do drugs, it's highly likely that you might die. There is no like, oh yeah, it's normal for that to happen. But in the ed treatment community, they do that to us. They plant this seed that like relapse is inevitable. And I don't, think that that it has to be. And it doesn't start with the first bite. It starts, in our brain with our thoughts. So, when we start having thoughts that are trending that direction, we have to, make use of the available tools and that we have, and don't follow through on the binge. So like it could be journaling and reflecting on what our feelings are in the moment. And the big question that we should ask ourselves is, what do I think this binge, or what do I think this food is going to do for me? So we need to find out what our real need is. So maybe we can reach out to a friend or our coach or a mentor and, talk it out. And I think that we could also like physically remove ourselves from a danger. If we're in a danger zone, with food, then we should physically remove ourselves from that situation temporarily.
Yeah, I think it's really about challenging the thoughts. So, or being very hyper vigilant about our thoughts. So if we decide to eat the food doesn't serve us well, think of, fine, I'm giving in and I'm eating it, but why am I giving it? What am I feeling? Am I feeling anxious? Is it because I'm socially uncomfortable and this will just sort of
Right.
dampen that feeling? Or is it because you had a hard day and you don't want to talk about your feelings, so you're putting it out on food? I think it's being super hyper aware. And then, as you said, I think that makes so much sense. Actually, the decision in your head comes first before you actually do any type of action. So just being very mindful. And I agree. I think the journaling part is so important. What if it's right before the binge? So let's say I'm in that pantry mode where I kind of want the chocolate and I know I shouldn't. Like, how do I, in the eating disorder, when I was in the facility, it was learning to ride that wave. And I know sometimes it truly feels like you're white knuckling it because you have so much anxiety and this desire to eat it, but you also know it's not good. And so you almost feel like you're pacing, even if you're not, maybe mentally. How do we
Yeah.
ride that wave?
Well, I think that's where, utilizing some of the tools, like, physically removing ourselves. If we're standing there looking in the pantry, and maybe like using halt, that's like going through this. Why am I standing here staring in the pantry? Am I truly hungry? If I am, then okay, I can eat, but I've got to eat a nutrient dense food that is part of my food sobriety, right? Or am I anxious about something? Am I looking for something to soothe me? And if soothing is what I need, what can I do that has nothing to do with food that's going to soothe me right now? Is it reaching out to a friend, or if I have a coach, contacting my coach? Am I looking for food because I'm lonely? Well, when we're lonely, what is the real need? The real need is we need connection, right? So again, reaching out to somebody, making a human connection. Or am I tired? Am I staying here looking for food because I'm tired and I'm just frustrated and like this is what I do when I'm tired. Well, when we're tired, our immediate need, even if we are really truly hungry, our immediate, if we're too tired to make a good eating decision, then our most immediate need over hunger is rest, right? So we just have to like, and it takes a while to get the mental wherewithal to be able to do that. And I think like that's where like you advocate for carnivore. I've been keto, I've dabbled in carnivore. I am meat based, but this is why with my clients I use a ketogenic or carnivore meat based approach to overcoming ed, because those are the foods that are going to give us the best chance at like it improves our cognitive function. And so when we're eating mostly nutrient dense food, our brain feels better, and when our brain feels better, we're less likely to make those decisions that are bad for us. And so we can maybe stop ourselves when we open the pantry door out of habit and realize there's another reason besides true hunger that we're standing here, and we have the mental wherewithal to be able to go through that process because we've been eating this certain way.
Yeah, I love the whole thing. I noticed going through my own recovery that I use food a lot for when I'm tired. So I'm so used to go, go, go. And when I start feeling tired, instead of, okay, maybe you just need a nap, I'm like, no, I refuse. And so I would try to eat something, and I realized it totally didn't serve me for that. So I thought that was always so beneficial to just, it's so simple to think, wait, is anything, let's go through the halt list. And I think that makes so much sense. I also think it's just, think of how babies are. If they're tired, it's so obvious they get super grouchy or they cry because they're hungry. And or if you leave them alone for too long, they cry too. So it's we are not very different from when we're a baby. It's just we try to muscle through things, and sometimes if we just acknowledge what we really need, we can it'll serve us so much better. What are your
Absolutely.
thoughts about all the carnivore breads and replacement foods? I see, I think brown butter is a more popular one, and I do see the carnivore bread still, but what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah. I've seen the carnivore ice cream and
Okay.
all of that, and like the puddings and stuff like that. I think it's a slippery slope, and it can become a danger zone. And then we talk about food freedom, and for me, for meals, I'm not going to use food for things that food's not meant to be used for. So for me, food is to nourish me and make me strong and healthy. It's not to comfort me or to entertain me. So I think replacement foods are just kind of swapping, one addiction for another. And using those doesn't allow us to really, find the true reasons we have this disordered relationship with food to begin with. And I think that in my experience in working with some I've had a few clients who have dabbled in stuff like that, like the PSMF bread or the egg pudding. And what ends up happening is they eat the whole loaf of PSMF bread in one day, or they eat the whole pan of egg pudding. And it's because they have a behavioral issue with food. And we can just so often, like, we justify it. We're like, oh, hey, this is carnivore. There's nothing in here that's going to hurt me. Except that if you still feel the need to eat a whole pan of something or a whole loaf of something, you still have that disordered relationship with food, even if it's not going to harm you in a way that eating a whole loaf of real bread would, right? Or a whole, tray of real brownies or something, right? Like, so I really think it's a slippery slope, and that it's, when we talk about relapse, I think that that's kind of like one of those first steps. It starts with eating the things that are acceptable and allowed. And I tell my clients, yeah, you're allowed to have egg pudding, you're allowed to have PSMF bread, but that's the wrong question. That it's not, am I allowed to have this? The question should be, is this beneficial to me?
Right.
And the answer is probably no, especially if
Yeah.
you're going to eat the whole thing.
Since I work mostly with the chronically ill, we have some people that have disordered eating for sure, but the eating disorder part is not the big component of our practice. And there was a period where everyone was eating the PSMF bread, and it was mostly to lose weight. Well, but we're still carnivore, and it's just, no, the egg whites is the majority of that food, and it doesn't have as much nutrition as the egg yolk, and it's also much more allergenic. And so from a nutritional perspective, I don't think it's always beneficial. But beyond
Right.
that, I do, like, I've never made a carnivore bread. I've never made egg pudding that you're talking about. I've never made chaffles. And partially it's because I'm so simple. But I also think one of the things that we always sort of make fun of the plant-based community is if you really just want bacon, stop making it with the
Right.
outsides,
Stop
the
using
skin of
carrots
the,
to make bacon.
yeah, just eat the real bacon. Or same thing with meats, with the Beyond Meat burger patties. And when we start making these alternative versions, I know, for instance, I used to eat a lot of sugar-free candies while I was doing keto. But one day, on a certain day that it was hard, when I was not paying attention to those HALT rules, I would end up eating the real thing because it was just that slippery slope you talk about. So
Yeah.
maybe on occasion, if you're at a holiday party and you know you can handle it, maybe. But I just think, what is the reason why you want these? And I think that will therein lie your
Yeah.
answer.
I think they can be good like bridge foods or transition foods. Like I know for me in my journey, my first year, or like the first 8 or 9 months, was definitely dirty keto. I was eating Atkins bars. I
Okay.
was making low carb, blueberry muffins. And looking back, like, would I like to say, oh, I, started clean, like right from the, I was so completely buried by my eating disorder that I wouldn't have been able to see that path. So I think that those foods are they great? No, but they're substantially better than what I was doing before. And even
Right.
eating those things, I still lost 83 pounds, still reversed my diabetes, still got all these like great benefits. But then at a certain point you realize, okay, well, these things are no longer beneficial for me. So I'm not gonna keep doing it. So I think they have their place. And I think that some people are able to like I know someone who has a chaffle like once or twice a month. That's fine. It's when you have to, be on guard for that behavior with these new replacement things. Like, is it mimicking your behavior with the
Right.
real thing? Like, do you feel like you have to have it every day? If you feel compelled to have a replacement food every day, that's a red flag.
No, that totally makes sense. Holidays are coming up. I think this is going to release around Halloween. That
Okay.
is the number one time I see people start falling off because it's just holiday after holiday. And so you think, okay, after Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas, and
Yeah.
all the other holidays in between. How do we navigate the holidays? I know for
Yeah.
me personally, I would get people, family members saying, you don't want to try the cake? It's like mom made it. What's the big deal? You're not going to die eating a piece.
Yeah. It's a tough one because the holidays are definitely a danger zone for people,
Mhm.
not just because of like all the temptations with all our drug foods, but a lot of people are people pleasers. They don't want to offend people. Fortunately for me, I don't really worry about offending people. I stick to my guns. But I think for most people, when they go into a social situation, whether it's during the holidays or just like getting together with friends, we all kind of already know the family dynamic, so we can prepare ourselves going into those situations. We can prepare ourselves by thinking ahead, going, okay, who's going to be there, who's most likely to say something to me, like, oh, Uncle Bob the cardiologist always has to bring up the saturated or whatever. Like, we can think ahead, okay, who's there that could potentially be a problem for me, what could they, and we should literally think like, okay, what are the potential things they could say to me and what can I say in return? And I think though that also we should be mindful of how we behave when we go into those situations, because I think a lot of times when we get pushback and criticism from people in those situations about what we eat, it's because we opened our mouth. Like, we can't help ourselves, right? Like, we love what this way of eating has done for us. We think everyone we know should do it, and we want to save the world, especially in the beginning when we're new. We want to save the world, so we go in talking and we ask lots of questions about the food. And I think if we just go in instead and put food on our plate and don't bring attention to ourselves, that we're less likely to get pushback. Now, there may be somebody who knows what we've been doing, and maybe maybe they look at us because they're gonna judge us and look at our plate, and they're gonna ask that question because they're trying to push buttons or something. So I just think ahead about what the family dynamic is, like who's going to be there. Think about comebacks that we can say. And then as far as like maybe like temptations with the food, I will tell clients a lot of time, eat some fatty meat
Right.
before you go to this event. if you're nervous or feeling vulnerable, because if you go in satiated, then you're less likely to make food decisions that you're going to regret.
Yeah, that has totally been my modus operandi. It's if I'm full and I go in, one, I'll have less anxiety. I think it's anandamide that's in meats and fatty meats that have a calming effect. And then you're less anxious. So then if you are hungry, you may struggle and want to eat something, but if you're not hungry, and then and I think everything you said in terms of relationally, that makes sense because it isn't a surprise when we run into family members that we already know or people that are triggering. And
Yeah.
I also think I've been going through this whole rabbit hole of boundaries and being mindful of certain relationships around me. And I also think if you don't have to go to an event that's like, let's say it's a company party and you know that it's not the best people, you don't have to go. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's the other thing too.
Yeah. I think a good, like, I talk about short-term strategies with my clients. And if you're new to this, if you're feeling vulnerable, you're afraid you're going to go off plan going into a situation, then a good temporary strategy is, okay, maybe this year I don't go to protect my peace, to protect my food sobriety. Is that a long-term strategy? Like, in order for me to stay food sober the rest of my life, I can never go to anything again? No, that's no way to live. That's not food freedom. But I think it's okay temporarily to skip some things that, that you're feeling too vulnerable for.
So I know you do coaching, you do one-on-one, but you also do group coaching. Tell me a little bit about the coaching and what are some, healing stories you've seen through people finally addressing this big elephant in the room that people just don't want to face.
Yeah. Well, in the coaching groups, it's great because you're in this environment where there's like-minded people. You all kind of have the same goals and struggles. One of the things I hear I think one of the things I hear the most from people, that I work with is they'll say stuff like, it's like you're in my head. And, and it's true. Like, I get to know clients on a personal level and, even like, become friends with some of them. And so I do get to know people, but I'm not like, it doesn't seem like I'm in your head because I've gotten to know you. It's because I know Ed. It's because I know what the disordered brain, looks like. So, my groups have a companion Facebook group. So group members can interact with each other, they can interact with me, and then we do that like weekly group call that gives people the opportunity to ask questions and share their wins and their struggles and their victories and all that. And I really love my groups. And there's been lots of lots of people, reversing their diabetes, losing weight, clearing up their psoriasis. I even had one client who, when we started working together, her kidney function was like 30%.
Oh my God.
And 6 months later, it was like over 60%. And her doctor was just like, oh my gosh. So many amazing, things happen when you start eating real food. And I try to remind my clients too, like, this is not a diet. You're not on a diet. So you don't have to behave like you're on a diet. Like, our daily number one thing that we pursue every day is your food sobriety. And as a result of that, all these other things that you've been wanting are likely to happen. Like, if you want to lose weight, if you focus on being food sober, you're probably going to lose weight. But if you, focus hard on losing weight, you stay stuck in like all those weight loss behaviors, and you're not focusing on food sobriety, which is really truly changing that relationship and perspective with food.
Yeah, I remember when I interviewed with you earlier on, and I'll put all of our old interviews in the show notes, but I remember you saying that. And so it was really hard, but if I ever had binged early on in keto, instead of doing that fasting or the OMAD, I would stick to, no, I need to eat 2 to 3 meals of meat. I know I'm
Right.
not going to lose some of the bloat or fat or whatever I gained over the binge, but I know that this is the best way to nurture my body. And that was so hard, but it works. It works. Whereas if I tried to fast for so many hours, and if I had so much glucose, I'd have a dip in energy, and then by the evening, there was a much higher chance of being back in another binge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard paradigm switch for people to make because that's the pattern that they're used to, is like, do something I regret and then try to fix it, try to undo it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you also see a lot of the mental shifts? So I know you talked about as you have food freedom, you have all this physical healing in terms of illness. But I mean, how much better does life get? Because that's the part that people don't see. Like, I know
Yeah.
how much better my life is now that I don't live in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, like that it definitely becomes different, like because we start noticing other things, and we start enjoying the other areas of our life that for years, because of our focus and obsession with food, we kind of lived life from the sidelines.
Right.
So I see that a lot with people, like, hey, you know what, I went ziplining with my family. I wasn't worried about how I looked, or I took a flight and I didn't eat the in-flight snacks because I know that that it's processed food. It's not good for me. Like, really, as I think one of the keys to recovery really is acknowledging that. I think if we cannot acknowledge that bad foods exist, that's that other argument, right? Like, there's good foods and bad foods. I think if we can't acknowledge that bad foods exist, um, then the idea is that, well, all foods do fit and they are not going to hurt me. So if we don't believe that there are foods out there that can hurt us, we're much more likely to eat them. So I think, just that mental shift of really like seeing food for what it is, and seeing those edible things that are called food as not food, that really helps in our process.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. It is such a hard battle with the good food, bad food, because I see what you're saying and that makes so much sense. But then I know also when I made everything bad food or labeled it, there was also this like desire as if, like Adam and Eve and the apple. So
Yeah.
it's just this slippery slope on both ends. But I agree with you. If you allow everything in moderation, there are foods that can hurt you, or what we define as foods. As we're closing, I just wanted to ask, you homeschooled all your kids, and we don't homeschool fully because we just cannot do it. So I don't know how you did it, but we do send our kids to a school that's like a homeschool and much
Mhm.
Socratic thinking.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on, because I do have some parents that are homeschoolers, any tips or advice for, and
Yeah.
then go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I always like to say that, like, so homeschooling, I loved it. It wasn't it was not easy. But I always like to say that, like, the worst day homeschooling was still better than the best day in a public school. And so my best tips though are, don't try to recreate the school model at home. I did that in the beginning, and we were pretty miserable because I had a schedule. I was trying to copy what school did. And kids are naturally curious about a lot of things until we squelch it with school, right? So I think that not recreating that school model and just letting kids naturally pursue things that interest them. I think I did the best with my youngest. I homeschooled all three of them. My older two were more of the guinea pigs, and I made a lot of like mistakes with them. So by the time my youngest, who's been homeschooled all the way through from kindergarten, and
Wow.
now he's almost 20, he works full time, all that. But I think I did the best job with him, because by the time I got to him, I wasn't in that rigid school mode. So he learned a lot of things like playing games and going and exploring places. And we would do library day and check out like whatever books he wanted. Like, it didn't matter if we were supposed to be, studying the Roman Empire. If he wanted to read about the Holocaust, then we did that. Like, I just let his desire lead him.
Right.
So I really think like that's the best tip. Like, don't try to recreate school, because there's a reason that model doesn't work so great.
Do you think there's anyone that regrets doing homeschool? I mean, I haven't met anyone, but I'm curious.
I mean, perhaps there is. I've never met anyone who says, I wish I sent my kids to school. No, I don't know anybody who's said that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's definitely the school or the quasi school they go to now, it ends right before middle school, and Caleb is now 9. So it just makes me think, do I put them in another version of the school that they're in, or do we homeschool and now we can travel? It's just things that I think about, but I know
There's a lot of hybrid programs, and I know you're in Austin, and there's I'll tell you the name of it afterwards, but there's an organization that like goes all the way through high school, where you can homeschool, but you still send them they go somewhere for classes and then they
Oh.
just do their work at home. So there's so many options.
Okay. No, cool. I'll have to talk to you offline. Thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you? I know that your wisdom with so much of the eating disorder and food freedom really struck me while I was going through my own journey of healing. And you said something long ago to me that really stuck too. And you said you always just say you're in recovery. You don't want to say you're recovered because you never want to lose the ball and then all of a sudden find yourself being sick. And so I have always taken that to heart. And so I never say I'm recovered. I say I'm in recovery, even though I have not binged and purged for years. And I think it's so much because of the wisdom that you share. So I appreciate you so much. But where can people find you in your coaching?
My website is ketocoachmary.com, and on Instagram and Facebook, I am at ketomary71. And I have a podcast that I started almost a year ago. It's called Food Freedom, and it's on Apple, Spotify, Google, all the places that you can find podcasts.
Yeah, and I love that podcast too, because you talk about little snippets and topics within that food freedom and even some of the topics that we brought up today. So I will put all of that in the show notes. But thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. It's always such a fun time talking to Mary. I always learn something that sticks with me when I talk to her. It's always been so helpful, even for my own eating disorder recovery journey. Mary has several coaching groups to support you. She has one that can help support you in your diabetes management with also the eating disorder, and also a Meaty Chicks, where it supports people that are in the keto carnivore diet space that may be older than, I think it's 40, maybe 50 years old. She also has a group that supports people through the holidays. So if you are sort of anxious about, this is your first holiday period where you are going to be food sober or not eating many carbs, then you may want to join this community that it has like-minded people that will help you navigate through the holidays. I think it's an 8-week community program that you may want to look into. I'll put all of the information in the show notes. Thank you, Mary, for joining me. It's always such a pleasure to just chat with you and learn more to help me stay in recovery. All right, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies and your minds, because it's the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.